Ground running today with Jeremy Riche of Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana, California. Jeremy serves as the early graduation coordinator, among other roles as well there in supporting the student athletes at Mater Dei High School. Jeremy and I had the opportunity to present at WACAC several months ago, and it was at that moment in time that I realized that this particular subject, there are more questions than answers, and we need to, as counselors, really get out ahead of this curve here, because in advising future-ready student athletes, this is something that is top of mind for those parents and families. And now with the NCAA eligibility shifts and the rule changes and everything that has come with all of that, these conversations are super important to have amongst all stakeholders, counseling offices, school administration, even the teaching and faculty members, in terms of just really coming together collectively to lead these discussions in a direction that best supports student athletes beyond the athletic realm, but it also in preparation for college and career. So with that, I'd like to kick it over to Jeremy here, as I know he's got a lot to share with us today. Thanks for joining us, Jeremy.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Jeff, and appreciate everyone kind of logging in and willing to dive in and lean into early graduation. It's becoming, I think, a hotter topic as of late. It's been, in the landscape of college athletics for 20-something years at this point, but even within the last recent years, as we'll see, it's just been jumping off the screen and more a part of conversations. So excited to lean into this. All right, we're good. Well, I appreciate everyone for making a little bit of time. I know there's a lot of different things you could be doing at this point in summer, this point in the week, this point in the day. So it's not lost on me that you're kind of investing in yourself and in your students and in your school environments to be learning a little bit more about our early high school graduation and really advising future ready student athletes, but also schools, and helping build out a framework that provides opportunities for students. And I describe this as, to anyone that I talk to, I describe it as a labor of love over the last 3 years, because it's been exactly that. There have been some challenges, some ups and some downs within our own kind of internal process and working through it in our specific school site and school setting. But we're really proud of where we are and think that it is something special and potentially even a flagship program for us here, but also a great model to consider and think about as other schools start to see and start to sense this trend as well. But before we get too far into it, I do want to introduce myself just to kind of give you a little bit of context on where I'm coming from and where kind of the interests and motivation lie for me. As you'll see, I've always found myself drawn to the intersection between the athletic and the academic experiences as being core parts for students and for families. So during my undergraduate time at the University of Notre Dame, I had the opportunity to be a practice player for the women's basketball team there for 3 years, so sophomore through senior year. And they were led by legendary coach Muffet McGraw. So seeing her leadership style with, future WNBA All-Stars on the roster, and seeing how everyone led differently on that team and at different times was just phenomenal. And during the time at Notre Dame, I met my wife, who's pictured right here with her 2 kids. And she played volleyball there, and I know I'm biased, but absolutely crushed it and is a rock star. But that's where we met. She's originally from California, so followed her out here. And I earned my master's in sport management from Long Beach State, while at the same time being an academic mentor within the UCLA athletics department. So it was heavily encouraged to get experiential learning through that grad program. So that was one of my internships, one of many during that time. And it eventually led to a full-time role as an academic counselor for football, women's basketball, and a variety of other Olympic sport teams. So phenomenal experience at UCLA, but then transitioned to Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana, California, where I've been for the last 4 years or so. And I know many on this call, many who will see this video, that work in the high school space. There's a lot of different hats that you wear within kind of your main role that you have. So one of those other hats that I wear is the NCAA coordinator hat, with an additional carve out as of the last 2 or 3 years as being the early graduation coordinator as well. So that's where I'm coming from in this presentation, kind of drawing on the insights, the experiences that I've learned along the way, and then even collaborating with some former colleagues from UCLA in terms of their college's perspectives on, in their world, it's early enrollees, our world at the high school level called early graduation or early graduates. So I was able to collaborate with them just to get and learn a little bit from their side of the desk and their side of the table. But without further ado, this is kind of our roadmap for where we'll go over the next couple minutes in terms of our agenda, but we'll look at and develop a little bit of context for our early graduation, the topic, the process, some different things that'll be good to kind of set the stage for us. We'll talk through local, national trends, some contributing factors for students, for families, for coaches, and athletic programs, the trade-offs as well, because something, usually in every decision that you make, something is being given up, right? Something is being traded for in order to actually step into something. So we'll talk through that. And then we get more in the kind of school-focused discussion on how do you build an early graduation framework? What should you be thinking? What has been helpful? What are lessons that we've learned through our process? And then college insights for consideration. And I always think of this as kind of the outcome that we want students to get to in order for them to be prepared for that next step into the college space. So we'll dive right in. And the first thing that I think is really helpful is just defining our terms. So every school, every high school might call it something a little bit differently. For the sake of this presentation, to be consistent, and just for kind of ease in talking for myself, these are the labels and status levels that we have for our early graduates. So from a high school's perspective, a student who is an early graduate is the typical student who goes through our process, and that is they graduate 1 semester early, and it's after senior year fall semester. The reclassification students, those are students who graduate a full year early. So that would be after their junior year spring semester. And then we have our reclassified early graduates who graduate a year and a half early, technically, after their junior year fall semester. We've only had one in our school's history be a reclassified early grad, but it was this past year, this past December. So it's top of mind and fresh in mind for me. We've had a reclassified student within the last 10 years or so, but still the primary majority of our students are in that 1 semester early category, just for context purposes. But in talking with my colleagues at the college level, the reclassified early grads are not uncommon in their space. It may be, a variety of different sports, but it's not just one student that they'll see in 10 years that graduated a year and a half early. From UCLA's example, they actually had, I believe, 3 students enter college technically after 2.5 years of high school, and they finished everything and they were able to step into the college space a little bit early. So every sport, every school, high school and college are a little bit different, but those are kind of our defined terms. And then from the college's perspective, these students would be early enrollees. So that kind of encompasses the early grads, the reclassified students, the reclassified early grads. And it's simply a student who enrolls in a non-traditional timeline. So it could be winter quarter for our quarter schools, or it could be the spring semester for our semester-based colleges. I may interchange these terminologies or these terms throughout the presentation, but it's usually from, hey, what perspective are we talking about? Am I talking from a college's lens, or am I talking about a high school's lens? But these could be interchangeable. They would be talking about the same student. And then why do we even want to talk about early graduation now? Number one, I mean, the interest in early graduation, the sense that we get from the conference presentations that we've done, and even just the local conversations, is that the interest in early graduation is accelerating. And we're seeing even expanding beyond athletics. So it's an interesting avenue to open up and to explore, even for those future-oriented, future-thinking students that don't have athletics as part of the profile, but maybe they have other goals, ambitions, and dreams that they're wanting to step into a little bit earlier. So this early graduation conversation is picking up steam. College athletic programs are making early graduation more known to their recruits as well. The feedback that I have received is that no college will require students to graduate early from high school, but they definitely ask about it, and they definitely highlight the benefits of it, because it also obviously benefits them too, as we'll explore in a couple other slides there. So they're making this more and more known to students and families, which then obviously trickle back to the high schools that they attend to see if this is an opportunity. Students in colleges also increasingly see early graduation as a competitive advantage. And much like any other industry, if one or two companies or organizations, institutions start having a competitive edge and a competitive advantage, then it doesn't take long for school number 3, school number 4, and almost everyone at that point to also offer that same competitive edge, which eventually levels that playing field. And I think we're getting there at the college athletic space for sure. And then many high schools are reaching or reacting case by case instead of leading with a clear purpose-driven process that respects the integrity of the degree that a student earns from their school, but then also, provides and aligns with their values and provides opportunities for students who are walking their walls and walking their halls. So these are a couple different reasons why we're kind of bringing this and having this discussion now. And this is the cool part is within the last 2 or 3 years, I've had a handful of schools reach out to us and ask us, hey, do you guys have early graduates? What is your process? What are you thinking? So I've been able to partner and kind of work through a handful of mostly local schools, a handful in California, one in Arizona as well, and helping them because they're sensing their trend in their own population. But they're seeing this come up and they don't have a process in place when the student asks. So then there's a time pressure. There's obviously a lot of communication and conversations that need to happen to cover all of these details. So this is a great kind of introduction for many people on the topic, and then also some great things to start getting in place for this whole process for students. The main hat that I wear, the primary responsibility that I have at Mater Dei High School is to onboard our incoming freshmen and freshman families, really. And it's been on more than one occasion where I'll have a student walk into my office, and before we get too deep into the meat of the conversation, they'll mention something like, hey, I want to come in, I want to graduate early, and I want to compete and attend an SEC school. And that's before we've even talked about classes for freshman year and so on and so forth. So that's because it's been more than just a one-off. Get the sense of early graduation is shifting from this rare exception, one every couple of years, to an emerging expectation for students and families. So this pathway, it appeals to the highly motivated, it appeals to the future-oriented student population that you may have. And then from a school side, it also supports retention for students who may otherwise transfer to take advantage of this opportunity. And so there's benefits to the high school for retaining these students. They are, in a way, ambassadors, right, as alum for your schools. It is another way of staying connected to them, especially if they stay and pursue this opportunity. And in some cases, even for us that we've seen, is they become even earlier donors back to the high school that they obviously had a good relationship with and so forth. And so college athletics is a space where like a lot of these conversations can have a lot of benefits while the student is here, but then also once the student leaves and pursues their next steps after high school. So this is kind of getting to the point of and dialing in on the point of why should schools be paying attention, because there's benefit obviously to the school, but then ultimately open up this opportunity for students as well. So that's a little bit of context for the early graduation piece, but then looking at the national and local trends, and hopefully giving you a little bit of perspective on where this sits. So this is the macro level. So we're looking kind of at the national trend, if you will. And we can even see based on this graph, there is a difference between this past year's cycle and 1 or 2 years ago even. So we have a sprinkling of different athletic programs that I was able to kind of find information on. And the blue portion of the graph is what was their early enrollee population 1 or 2 years ago, whatever was best available. So you'll see it's hovering in this 10 to 20 space, more or less. But for many of, especially kind of those Power 4 programs, in 2026, it's starting to creep up into the 20 to 30 range even, which is fascinating and speaks to, hey, this is becoming more and more of a possibility for our students that we're supporting and working with. So it shouldn't be a surprise when these conversations start to happen a little bit more, is because college programs are driving that particular opportunity. But I think what's fascinating here is just on the USC side. So USC has been a kind of flagship institution, a prominent member of kind of college athletics, college football. They had 16 early enrollees within the last 1 or 2 years. And then with the recruiting philosophy, staff changing a little bit, they've really focused in and honed in on the early enrollee portion. So they 2x'd their early enrollee enrollment and registration from 16 1 or 2 years ago all the way up to 32. So I think they have 1 or 2 or 3 incoming freshmen this school year that didn't pursue early graduation at their high school. And so that's been kind of an interesting feedback to get from our students. So we sent 4 students to USC within their football program, and seeing them at graduation and talking with them through kind of the transition athletically, academically, they saw tremendous value in being there 6 to 8 months earlier and so forth. But those numbers are from the football side, but also from the other sports. The other fall college sports reap the same benefits that the football student athletes also receive too. So an expected continued growth in women's volleyball, in men's soccer, women's soccer, they all kind of offer that same benefit to students. And within women's volleyball, it's becoming more and more common. Some of the elite programs, the Nebraskas, the Texas, certain years, certain teams, all of their freshmen are early enrollees, right? So now they have this extended amount of kind of runway to the start of their freshman season and so forth. Women's volleyball for us, we had 3 students this past year graduate early, go to a USC, go to an Oregon. And this coming year, I think we're in the 3 to 4 space again. So we're sensing this trend pick up that we'll highlight a little bit more on the next slide, which we'll go to now. So this is that local trend that I was mentioning earlier, and this is specific to us. So this is what we've seen at a, I would say, a high athletic profile school. So I understand we're on one side of the spectrum here. This is probably not the typical high school, but this is what our lived experience has been. So we had the exceptions, right? We had 3 students, 2 students, 3 students, closer to 10 years ago. Even as recently as 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we had 0 students pursuing early graduation, and then 8, and then 9, and last year we had our highest at 12. And then this coming year, we're getting closer to 20 for this coming December. So it's starting to become, with those numbers, it's starting to become a program and almost a cohort as opposed to these one-off exceptions and so forth. Across all of these numbers that you see on the graph, football is by far the dominant. So that's what we've seen. I think it's also kind of reflected in the college athletic space, but nearly 80% of our students are in football. Girls volleyball, like I mentioned, is trending up for us. So about 10% of all of our early grads have been in girls volleyball. And then soccer has been, on average, it's been like one every couple of years. So that kind of settles in at about 5%. But also our non-student athlete population. I think we have 2 students this year who have gone through the process and been approved for it. Don't have athletics tied to their experience at all whatsoever, but they have certain things that they'll be doing in that second semester of senior year, if you will, that requires them to kind of, or motivates them to graduate one semester early to start acting on that as well. So these are some of those trends that we're sensing that it also closely aligns with what college athletic programs are pushing and advertising as well. And the schools listed at the bottom, I don't list that to say, hey, here's where we're sending our students, but it's a sampling across the country, across conferences, across different types of institutions, a private school in Stanford versus a state school like UCLA. And then out of state, in state, and we even have UC Davis in there near the middle. And the part that I like to highlight here is UC Davis isn't an Alabama or an Ohio State or a USA. Like, they're not competing for national championships every single year, but they're still seeing the value of bringing in their guys early, helping them develop, get adjusted, transition to college. And they're communicating that value, and students are stepping into that opportunity as well. So it's touching a lot of different higher ed institutions, which is only increasing the opportunity that students have to step into from high school as well. So that's kind of where we're feeling it from a specific local standpoint. But the other thing, if we're on the other side of the spectrum, right, there's rural schools out there. There's students who have one early grad every couple of years, and it's, should we really get a process in place if we're just gonna kind of handle it as a one-off every couple of years? Even, I keep coming back to, even with just one early grad, you have the ability to have a lifetime impact for students, especially in this day and age of college athletics and the different opportunities that are available. And I think a realistic monetary value that is becoming a reality for many students. This has the ability to change a student's trajectory in their life. And like, what an awesome opportunity to be a part of that. From an admissions perspective for different schools, this could be a success story and even a selling point of, hey, we're willing to work with families, and we have a pathway in place for actually like highly motivated students and future oriented students as well. And in some cases for us too, we've had parents and families be strong advocates or even stronger advocates for our school because of the individualized plan and path that we could provide their student to step into. So that's been a really cool way of working with families and working with students and seeing either their lives change or seeing just that connection between the family and the school even be strengthened through this experience as well. The other thing that I would say has been helpful that we experienced as we were starting to build this 3-4 years ago is when you have a process and a foundation in place, you're able to scale that quicker and easier. So if that 1 turns into 2, turns into 4 within a span of 2 or 3 years, you have all the necessary things in place in order to build on that and to build it with confidence and hopefully a light workload on counselors and on administration and so forth. So even with one high school early graduate, I think the impact you can have on your school community, and specifically for that student is really high. And then from a contributing factors standpoint, this is where there's a couple different things and couple different reasons that students have expressed to me of, hey, this is why I'm interested. And this is where that motivation is coming from. So contributing factors kind of dialed it into a handful of topics, but the early transition to college, we have the emergence of NIL opportunities, the new age-based eligibility model that the NCAA just proposed, voted on, and approved. That has some slight nuances that is already affecting some of our students. And then the college athletic landscape with transfers and the loosening of restrictions there is just, it's giving more benefits to the early graduation option for students and that colleges are looking to explore. So the early transition to college, I've alluded to this already a little bit, but it's mainly looking at those fall college sports who under a traditional timeline would graduate in May, would start probably college ball or college practices sometime in June, maybe even July, maybe even early August potentially. And then they're jumping into the school year, balancing the travel demands of in-season, balancing the social transition away from home potentially for the first time completely on their own. And then they're balancing the academic transition to college, and there's just a level of there's a jump that always happens between the high school course load and then the college course load. So they're balancing all of those and the pressure of being in season, all of that at the same time, which can be tough, which can be challenging. Obviously, it can be done, and students do well in that transition, but it is also a lot to take on your plate. So what the spring entry does, it allows students to enter the college scene in January. Most of the time, it's usually sometime in January, 6 to 8 months before the start of the traditional school year when their peers would be coming in. And it's not a no pressure environment, but it's a lower pressure environment. There are certain demands that being in season provide. It could be the travel, right? It could be the outside pressure and the scrutiny that comes along with being a collegiate student athlete these days. But this provides a lower pressure environment and allows the academic transition to happen before a California school is traveling across the country because of the recent conference realignments, right? We have, I think UCLA is in the same conference as Wisconsin, Michigan, I think some other schools that are even closer on the East Coast side of things. So our Olympic sports are traveling middle of the week. Our football teams are missing potentially Thursday and Friday classes in season. So they're having to adjust and transition to all of this. The spring entry does provide a lower pressure environment here, just because of the off-season benefits of it. And then from a development standpoint, there's access to strength and conditioning at these athletic programs. Obviously, nutrition is a big focus for students, and usually looks different from high school into college. Learning the playbook, having the team chemistry, and developing relationships with teammates, with professors, with coaches, with academic support staff. There's so many things that can happen over a longer period of time if a student were to come to college in that spring semester of otherwise senior year of high school. So this is where I've heard a lot of these conversations from coaches kind of articulating this to recruits, and then they're coming back and seeing the benefit of it. And they genuinely want to step in and put themselves in the best situation that they can. And ultimately, where does this impact our students? So that early enrollee process is a pivotal recruiting advantage for colleges who allow it. And in our process, even this year, we learned that Ivy League schools do not allow early enrollees to come in January. Like they want to keep that traditional college matriculation timeline. So this has been a fascinating thing to work through. A student was approved for early graduation on our end, but then is likely to revert back to a 4-year graduation timeline, just to be able to take advantage of this opportunity with an Ivy League school recruiting them. So with each of these contributing factors, I want to look at the impact ultimately on our students and what they're feeling, what they're hearing. The second contributing factor is the emergence of NIL opportunities. So recent changes in the NCAA now allow students to profit off their name, image, and likeness in two ways. And this is like a Cliff Notes version of what kind of Jeff is helping support and build through Polaris. And then even I know Dr. Scott Grant presented probably a couple weeks ago at this point. He did the deep dive, right? He's going to be the content expert on this, but this is like a very macro level view of where these buckets of funds are coming from. So a student can receive money from the college's athletic department, and that is through the revenue sharing bucket. So at the moment, I believe that cap that athletic departments have to pay their student athletes for their own name, image, and likeness is a little bit north of $20 million across all teams. So every athletic program can decide, hey, we're going to give football this much, basketball X amount, women's basketball X amount, gymnastics, baseball. If those are flagship programs for their school, then they may want to incentivize and use that as a recruiting tactic. But revenue sharing is a pool of funds that students can receive and can earn. And then the second one is more connected to brand partnerships or sponsorships. So this is where the company specifically is reaching out and connecting to student athletes and paying them directly for their own name, image, and likeness. So this is very kind of like high level stuff. It's not getting into the weeds at all. I'll defer that to other experts. But the impact, kind of looking at this, how does it impact our students that we're advising and counseling? It essentially is 6 to 8 months additional of earning potential for students, and potentially with some ranges and so forth, these could be the highest incomes that students could earn on a yearly basis, right? So that creates a sense of urgency, obviously of motivation for students to step into that and to explore what the early graduation pathway looks like for students. The new age-based eligibility model that we touched on, this states that a student's college athletic eligibility clock would start the academic year after a student turns 19 or when a student graduates high school, whichever one comes first. So they want to simplify kind of the initial eligibility timeline for this, make it a tighter age range for students competing at the college level. So this is what kind of moved through recently, even this past summer, probably a couple weeks ago at this point. And so a student would have 5 years, once their clock starts, they would have 5 years to compete in 5 seasons. They're not guaranteed 5 seasons, but they kind of have this window of time in order to compete. And it eliminates the redshirt years and the extension of eligibility waivers that I think they were getting caught up in so many lawsuits and so many just kind of ancillary discussions and conversations and issues where like their primary focus was, obviously the benefit of the current student athletes, mostly in this age range. So they're eliminating a few different things, streamlining, simplifying. But what is the ultimate impact of this change? Because it's a seismic shift from an NCAA's perspective and to determine like who can compete in college athletics. So the impact that we've seen pretty quickly is for those students who have been held back for whatever reason and done 2 years of 8th grade. Maybe they did 2 years of 7th grade instead, or they did kindergarten and repeated years then in order to kind of time high school and college enrollment a certain way. These students are likely to be the most impacted by this rule over the next 5 years until all of that cohort has entered college. Because the sweet spot here, the unfortunate sweet spot, would be those students who have already done their held back year. And then the NCAA changes the model that determines kind of when the clock starts. So their decision and year has been repeated already, but now they can't really change or accelerate naturally, except through this early graduation reclassification process. So that's where a reclassification request may rise to not lose that year of college athletic eligibility once a student turns 19. So for example, in this situation, we have about probably 10 students in this boat that could potentially be affected. The nuance here is it's the year after the academic year after a student turns 19 is when their clock starts. We have a handful of students who have a summer birthday who turn 19, let's just say July 1, and their senior year starts August 17th, I think is this year, for us here anyways. So technically it's the academic year after they turn 19. If they compete senior year or attend high school senior year, they're potentially losing a year of college athletic eligibility, and all of the things that come along with that, right? So for those students, it was identifying them early, and it was understanding, hey, we're aware of this. We have some time to kind of formally make a decision. But what does reclassification look like in order for you to maximize kind of what these goals, what these dreams are of yours? And then the other impact is if students don't play freshman year, this is for any student, but if they don't play freshman year, they'll never get that year back either. So what used to be a red shirt, hey, we can save this and tack it on to the back end of our college time, that no longer is the case. So the preparation for the first season for freshman year is even more critical, which adds to that urgency behind the early graduation topic. And then the loosening of transfer restrictions too. There's fewer restrictions now than there were probably even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And this allows students to move more easily without losing the athletic eligibility piece. And so there's a lot of factors at play for why students transfer and why they transfer to certain schools. But it naturally creates a lot of roster turnover, right? So there's a lot of instability just from a management, like a team management side. And so when coaches can bring in a certain number of freshmen early enrollees and develop them and have them become more known quantities going into season, it provides a lot of stability from the coach's kind of perspective. And this is one of the reasons why they incentivize it, why they explore it with their recruits as well. So those are some of the reasons why students say yes, right? Why they may come to you as counselors or as individuals within the high school space and say, hey, I'm interested in this. I think it's our position of, hey, how can we provide some realism to the conversation, and how can we potentially offer a different perspective on this to help you have an informed decision in this process for the student and the family. So the trade-offs, I think I've kind of thought about it in these three kind of buckets, if you will. The academic adjustment, right? Like that's the first and foremost that stands out. If we're completing the same amount of requirements in a shorter amount of time, that means it's at a faster pace. There's higher expectations. There's more classes you're going to need to take at the same time, while balancing and improving on the athletic side and still retaining success in your academics. So the accelerated high school academic plan, but also you're jumping into a full-time college load 6 to 8 months earlier than your peers are. So there's a certain level of just preparedness and development that students should be meeting in order to feel confident, to feel ready to jump into the college space that much earlier. The social experience is also something that they would be in a way forfeiting. There's a lot of spring events that happen during senior year. You have the winter formals, the proms, the graduations as well, that sometimes students are unable to come back for. You have the senioritis that naturally comes up and usually is a bonding experience for many seniors. But it's those small daily moments. It's the daily conversations. It's the interactions with teachers, with counselors, even time with family that they'll never get back. Like once you start in that college kind of hamster wheel, it's hard to slow that down. And then from a closure standpoint, you're in a way just cutting that off 6 months earlier. And we try to do as best we can to provide that closure for our early grad cohorts. But this is something that it's potentially something to think about. It may not influence the decision, but it could be something to identify and work through for students in our role. And then the athletic considerations. Many times students are competing in multiple sports, and one's a spring sport, one's a fall sport. We're potentially giving up that senior year track season or senior year baseball season because of early graduation. And then the other part is high school sports. It looks a lot different than college sports. Obviously, it's serious. There's, a level of intensity within high school sports. but it also carries a little bit of fun and joking around and being high school, teammates with each other. In the college space, higher expectations, higher pressure, it becomes more job-like. And so there's a certain level of confidence students have to have jumping into that space, but also like a fortitude and a resilience, because there's going to be challenges up and down there. So this all kind of comes back to, and I always tie it into students, of just because you want to, and maybe the plan looks good and you can do it, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. So what is this best decision for you as you're thinking through this? And then the last two areas that we'll touch on are a little bit more school directed, and obviously like outcome based and outcome focused as well. But building that early graduation framework is going to be an important piece. And I've kind of thought about it in two different spaces. Obviously, we have our student focused questions, which are going to be a part of that conversation that we have with students, that we have with families. Who's driving that decision? Is it the student because they're interested and motivated? That's been a goal of theirs for a long time, they've been working towards. Or is it the coach and they're feeling the pressure? Is it, nowadays we have agents for high school students, is it the agent putting pressure on you? How they answer that question also determines the type of conversation that you have with the student too. Then thinking about, what does success look like for me in this plan, like as a student? If we're taking more classes, we have more on our plate, it could impact the grades that we're earning in these classes. Like, is that something that we've negotiated with ourselves and we're okay with because of the outcome at the end of it? Or are we a person that if we get less than 100% on anything, like we start to spiral and there's some other things that we need to take care of? So looking at what does success look like for the student. Is a student ready academically, socially, emotionally, helpful things to think through and talk through? And then are they choosing this path because they're ready and they're saying yes to something in the future? Or are they just done with high school and they just want to kind of cut their time short and just be done with it and move on? So I think of it as, are they saying yes to this opportunity in the future or no to their current circumstances? And we've had students kind of in both of these spaces as well. And those are different conversations to have with students. So some student focused questions to evaluate this whole early graduation process, but then school-based questions, details that we've had to work through and refine and continue to have conversations around is, who is eligible for early graduation? Is this all students? Is it just student athletes with an offer letter from a school, right? Are we getting very particular on our special and unique circumstances? Are we going to wrap any conditions around early graduation as well? So do they have to have a certain GPA? Do they have to have certain grades in certain classes? How early or how late can requests be made? Are there any graduation requirements that will be modified or changed? And if so, what are those details like? Here at a private Catholic school, we hold students to all of our graduation requirements, whether they graduate in 4 years or 3.5 or 3. And it was really important for us to not sacrifice the religious formation component of our experience and education. So we have other schools that waive that religious studies requirement, and they've made that determination on within their own leadership. But for us, we see that as a critical central part of being a modern day student. And so that's been really purposeful and obviously values based for us. What is the expected financial commitment from the family? This varies as well per high school. So it could be all of senior year. It could be just fall semester, since that's what they're physically here for. I could see there also being a middle ground between the two with an early graduation fee, just based on the amount of work that it requires on the staff side in order to facilitate it. So they have some great kind of student-based and then school-based questions as well. And then some of the main lessons that we've learned about from high school is having that formalized process is crucial, and having a centralized person to coordinate that process minimizes risks, eliminates the inconsistencies from counselor to counselor, and then it creates these equitable opportunities for students that we're supporting. So that's been kind of this overarching big lesson learned, and thankfully we learned it early, and that paid dividends moving forward. Conditions provide objective benchmarks for students to complete. It's not a secret menu that students are never aware of. We're pretty clear with what students need to meet in order to be approved and request early graduation. So having a set of those based on your school's profile, helpful to have. And then junior transfers sometimes are tricky. And so they require a close, detailed view just to make sure all of the buckets of requirements are met. But having an upfront conversation with them is very, very helpful just to set the expectation. The last part in the note at the bottom is if you don't build the system, the exceptions will build it for you. That year we had 8 students graduate early, and then it expanded to 9 and 10 and 12. The year we had 8, that was our year of exceptions. And I think we very much needed that in order to understand that's not how we want to operate. So we refined it over the next 1 to 2 years to really hone in what our program looks like. And I think it's gotten to a really good spot right here. So those are some from this side of the desk, some helpful things to think about from a high school's perspective. And then over the next, probably the next 3 minutes or so, I'll touch on the college insights for considerations. And then I'd love to hear if we have time for any questions at the end, just to continue the conversation that way. But what colleges need from high schools, this is more prescribed, right? They need a student's transcript through 11th grade, having an early graduation plan on a school letterhead. These are some kind of just logistical things and formal things that colleges need. And it makes their life easier and smoother as they're bringing in students in a non-traditional timeline. The student's final official transcript has to be sent to the college, has to be sent to the NCAA Eligibility Center, which would happen anyways after 4 years. Now it's just after 3.5. But the part where we've adjusted a few things is that our early grads require early grade submission by our teachers. So there's a downstream effect by submitting this in our world before Christmas break happens. But it also requires a level of coordination with teachers to organize early finals for early grading, for us to be able to create the transcript and then send it to colleges and so forth. And this past year, we only had 1 question over Christmas break from college. So I consider that a win on our side. But then the transition to transition challenges for colleges is that they're communicating with so many more stakeholders these days than what they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. From students to parents to agents, there's obviously increasing complexity too. The part where my colleagues in the academic support area at UCLA really highlighted this, and I saw it during my time there, but supporting 18-year-olds living away from home for the first time, sometimes even international students, they'll get as graduating in this non-traditional timeline as they enter established teams and social groups. So for football classes of early enrollees, you may have 20, you may have 30. That's a cohort you're jumping into right away. For potentially our women's soccer student athletes who they were the only early enrollee, and they're joining a team that has already been through the throes of season, right? They've gone through challenges, they've formed relationships through that, and then you have this one additional person coming on the back end of that, but then earlier than the next recruiting class is coming in. So the transition socially can be interesting as well. Small mid-year, and that's the point of the small mid-year cohorts feeling isolated. There's orientation programming, but limited during that middle of the year timeframe. And then expectations from professors on day one are, hey, I'm teaching a class of college students. A little less flexibility and a little less grace than maybe we would see at the high school level as well. So those are just some challenges from the college's perspective. And then I think that's also the same slide. So the indicators of success are really the last things that we'll touch on is, can our students show initiative? Can they ask questions and ask for help if and when they need it? Do they have good time management skills? Because it's at a different level at the college space than it is at the high school space. And are they ready to hit the ground running? They don't have this week ramp up time. They don't have syllabus week in the beginning of spring semester. They don't have this welcome weekend that provides this opening of campus. So they really have to jump in and hit the ground running, and handle structure and freedom at the same time, which for a 16, 17, 18-year-old student can be challenging. So are we setting up and creating a program at the high school level that helps develop this along the way, but then also adds perspective to the conversation to make sure it's the right decision for the student that they're working with as well. So these are just a few of the key takeaways, kind of summarizing what we've talked about on the last couple of slides. And then I'll just throw in the questions at the bottom. I'll let you kind of read through that and digest it. But I'm also curious to hear of questions or even trends or things that you guys are seeing on your end as well. So Jeff, if you want to, feel free to open it up and we can.
Yeah, Brian, please feel free to interject. Thank you.
Yeah, first, I think this is wonderful. I actually work in college admissions, not on the athletic side, just in general admission, but I think all of what you've included is just amazing. I was curious, either do you at Mater Dei or know of any colleges that track your early enrollees, so that you have some data to say, hey, it takes a special kind of person, but either, do they graduate from college quicker? Do they maybe retain at higher rates and transfer less? Is there any sort of data as far? And I know it's early because you're talking about probably hundreds or maybe thousands of students as opposed to tens and hundreds of thousands across the entire population, but just kind of any, outcomes for these early enrollees.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great thing to dive into a little bit more. I have not seen any of that published. In my conversations, it hasn't been so outcome focused or outcome based. It's been more on the intake, right? So like, how are we creating a system and how are we supporting our students in that transition? But I haven't heard of any of those kind of additional follow-ups. It's something within, at each of the presentations that I've had at the kind of different conference levels, this has been a common question. So this gets my wheel turning in terms of connecting with our alums. So I can selfishly do it from our 30 to 40 students who have graduated early and start to get a pulse of, hey, what has their retention been as well. So like that's a great line of thinking to understand, hey, are we actually setting the students up for success in our colleges, kind of supporting students in this transition? I think that's a helpful piece to the conversation. I just haven't seen it quantified yet or even touched on yet. So that would be the expansive, that would be how our program probably expands from a Mater Dei's perspective, is to track our alumni and to get their thoughts on their transitions.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Jeremy, it has my wheels spinning in terms of just students that I've worked with previously at former schools that I was counselor at, in which, this is a bigger conversation than just that of, for student athlete pathway in that sense, because in so many instances, these kids are ready and they're excited and they're eager to lean forward. And from a future ready planning conversation, how we as the stakeholders can come together and really drive this in alignment with the values of our institutions and connecting the frameworks from a graduation standpoint, but also from stakeholder buy-in. What challenges have you faced at Mater Dei in terms of buy-in, maybe, and just navigating those conversations, knowing that, bigger picture, you're all working towards that same unified mission. So I'd like to just kind of kick the tires on that.
Yeah. Some of the challenges I would say is battling the mindset of we've always done it a certain way versus the landscape has changed, right? We just celebrated our 75th birthday, I guess, anniversary, years in existence for Mater Dei this past year, which was really fun. But I think with so much history behind us, we sometimes get lost in that tradition. We sometimes get lost in, well, we've always done it this way, right? And so it's taken some continued conversation with different staff members, different faculty members, of understanding this is a new landscape that we're living in. These are true opportunities that could be life-changing for students, and they're pursuing dreams and able to step into that, and highlighting their reasons why. And it's sometimes even different than the perceived reasons why. They're just doing it for the money. They're just doing it for X, Y, and Z. But it's also articulating and showing, hey, they're doing it for other reasons that make a lot of sense, right? They want to set themselves up academically. So that's like they're allowing themselves a little bit more transition. So I think battling that, and it goes back to just having great relationships with campus partners, having listening ears, and then also driving some innovation. And sometimes that takes time because there's resistance along the way. But having that student-focused and student-centered conversation always at the heart of it is the common ground that we have with everyone here on campus. So that's probably been the biggest challenge. I don't think there's been too much of a challenge from like working with families or working with students. We've dialed that in pretty well. It's been a little bit of just that internal, hey, how can we all kind of rally around this opportunity? Do we still trust our mission enough that a student can go through our formation process in 3.5 years and still have the same outcomes as a student going through our formation process over 4 years? And I think we do in many of those senses and many of those examples that we have. So that's been the cool part. Any challenge provides opportunities to kind of get through that challenge. And then it's a cool thing to look back on.
Yeah. And, you know, if we know anything, you know, in relation to today's relationship between parents and partnerships with schools, whether it be public or private, you know, families aren't afraid to pivot and to look in other directions. So this really is a retention conversation, and that visible ROI that a positive experience can bring with, you know, collaborating and working together through a transition like this. I mean, it's life-changing, and in many instances, if those are the revenue share, you know, athletes that are being recruited and encouraged to enroll early, sudden income is present and available for them, and that's a big part of that decision-making process. So, but yes, it's something that as educators, you know, it's here, and I'm really glad that you're able to take some time today to be able to share your experience with us. Brian, go for
it. Sorry, I got another one. I'm curious, Jeremy, for your students, do you you know, because I think it's great that you highlight, you know, making sure they fulfill college enrollment requirements and also high school graduation. So do you see a lot of your early enrollee or early grad students doing like dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, or online courses? Like, you're in California, so like fulfilling the A through G requirements, are they somehow utilizing some of those other options rather than just like your general curriculum?
Yeah, this is great because I would say depending on the school, you have a couple more tools at your disposal. We don't necessarily. So one of our policies is that a student has to take on their first attempt their graduation requirements here. So we don't allow and we don't give credit for dual enrollment classes for graduation credit at the high school level. Obviously, students can take it for enrichment, for college applications, college admissions, and so forth, but we don't accept it for graduation requirements, and we don't accept outside institutions as graduation requirements as well. So in the last couple of years, independent of the early graduation student athlete piece, we've started to partner and work with an online provider. So that's where we have a little bit of flexibility in that regard. But I would say 98% of our early grads over the last, I'll go with my experience, last 4 years, all of their classes have been strictly through our high school because that's the standard policy that we have. But on occasion, we've had to, or we've offered this online option to a few to make the plan work and to kind of fit logistics and priorities and so forth. So that's where we have a little bit of flexibility with that online provider, but we're still driving that formation process with our teachers, with our mission, with the Catholic identity that we value here in our institution. That's where we want to keep it as in-house as possible. I think it only becomes more able to be done if you start to include those other outside pieces. So we're almost restricting ourselves, but still able to actually meet that for all of our early grads too.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thank you again for taking the time today. First of many, as this conversation is one that is surely going to continue on throughout the year, just in terms of being able to build these frameworks out and meet these counselors where they're at in regards to their respective communities. So I would like to follow up with a recording after this, as well as I'll provide Jeremy's email address in that email that goes out to everyone as well, in case you have other questions or you'd like to continue the conversation with Jeremy. But
perfect. And then I'll add one last thing, Jeff, just for the last slide as well, in case
awesome. There it is.
Have that email. It just needed to go one more side, but a big thank you to everyone and to you, Jeff, of facilitating the conversation and even starting this conversation on our end. Super excited to kind of partner with different schools in a few different areas, develop a program pathway that just opens the doors for students and families, but doing it in a thoughtful, intentional, and proactive way as well. So feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to connect in any way that I can be helpful.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Appreciate it.